Now, as we turn to the Word of God this morning, I'm going to be reading a very well-known story. I'm guessing that the vast majority if you in here have heard it at least once, probably more than that. It's a story about an Aramean general named Naaman. Not a Jewish man, in fact, from an enemy of the Jewish state of the time, and yet he sees God do some amazing things in his life and some unexpected things. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be taking a look at how God and his sovereignty moves in the life and story of Naaman the Aramean. So if you have your Bibles and want to turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 5, I'll be reading only verses 1 through 8. We'll read the rest of the story in coming weeks, but today, just 1 through 8. 2 Kings 5, beginning with verse 1. Now, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who's in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means, go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me?" When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." This whole account of Naaman and his healing breaks up into 3, I guess we'll call them acts. 3 different acts, and each of those acts has, as the main human character, a different person. The first act is the one we'll look at today, and this act I call the slave girl's comment. And the main character of this first act, the main human character, is the slave girl. The next act that we'll look at next week is the actual healing. And the main central human character of that act is Naaman himself. And then the final act we'll call the lie, which we'll look at 3 weeks from now. And that will be the story of Gehazi, Elisha's servant. He'll be the primary human character in that account. But running through this whole story as the foundational character is God and his sovereignty and his plan. So we have here an Aramean, Naaman. He's from the country of Aram, which is north of Israel, and by its capital, Damascus, you might recognize another name by which it is often known. It's the nation of Syria. And it's still where modern-day Syria is located today. So Naaman is a very highly regarded military general, and he's won a lot of victories for Aram. But there's a caveat there. Because the author of 2 Kings makes something very clear. Naaman was used to bring victory to Aram, but who brought the victory? The Lord. Through him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. And that's important because it establishes that everything that is to follow comes from the hand of God. It also establishes this. We're looking at a Jewish nation, right? The nation of Israel, God's chosen people. But the principle is that God's sovereignty, God is sovereign not only over Israel, but over all nations and over all people. And today, if we extend that truth, God is sovereign over everybody, not just over those who claim to follow him or belong to him. God is sovereign. And victory or defeat, both, come from his hand. But Naaman's got a problem. And a pretty big problem. He has leprosy. We've talked about leprosy here before. In Israel, leprosy was a death sentence. It was a skin disease, a debilitating skin disease, and actually the word leprosy in the Old Testament is used to describe a variety of different incurable skin diseases. But the point is that someone who had leprosy was forced to withdraw, essentially withdraw from their lives. They had to withdraw from corporate worship. They had to withdraw from their family, from their friends, from their work. And they had to live a completely isolated life by themselves, never approaching another human being, never coming into contact with another person out of fear of contagion. And remember, this is why it was so incredible that Jesus would actually touch a leper, not only speak to a leper, but actually touch them. Naaman's got leprosy. And he's got no hope for treatment or cure. And in the context of his disease, God's going to unroll his plan. Now, I said that this first act, the main character really is the slave girl, and we've got to take a look at what's going on with her. Because the author mentions her slavery in a really offhand manner, which might make us jump over how important that fact is. I know that in the news today, the subject of human trafficking is at the forefront. And even within the church, there are many, many people who are working against human trafficking. But guys, human trafficking is not a new phenomenon. We can see that right here. It's thousands of years old, maybe even more. And this girl, this young girl from Israel, was a victim of human trafficking. We don't know exactly how it happened. All we know is that a band of raiders from Aram make an incursion across the border into Israel, and they take this girl and probably many others captive as well. We don't know. But think about that tragedy for a moment from the perspective of the girl. With no warning, without any thought or idea, from one second to another, she lost everything. Her family, her people, her home, her relationships, her friends, her identity. And she is ripped out and taken to a foreign country where she does not speak the language. She has no one to support her or care for her. She is the lowest of the low, a young female slave. New master, new household, no longer a daughter, no longer a member of the family, but now a slave. This was a horrible tragedy for it to happen to anybody, let alone someone so young and so alone. I don't know the individual circumstances of everyone who's here this morning. And it may be that you or someone you know, someone close to you, has experienced in one way or another the dire effects of human trafficking. That's possible. But whether you do or don't know someone in that situation, many of you have experienced tragedy. Whether it's the death of someone you love, or sickness, or financial destruction, whatever it may be, I don't know, but you have experienced tragedy. And so maybe in some small degree or to a great degree, you might be able to relate a little bit to what this girl was going through. But in the light of what's happened to her, the very, very brief glimpse that we're given into her life is quite astonishing, really. Because notice how she behaves. Let's think about this for a moment. Let's extrapolate. All we're told is a very brief history and one statement that she made, and that's all we know historically about this girl. But a lot is reflected in just those two things. First of all, she's kind to her master. Now, this may be a reflection as much on Naaman and his wife, that they must have been pretty good masters, because she responds to them with goodwill. But regardless, I put myself in her shoes, and I think I'm kind of glad that my master has leprosy. He's getting a little of his own back. You want to buy me as a slave? You want to rip me unjustly away from my family and everything I've ever known? God's doing that to you. And I'm kind of happy about it. So even if I had an idea of how you might get some kind of relief, I'm not going to be the one to speak up. But she does. She speaks up and she says, if only you would go to the prophet in Samaria, you'd be healed. So she shows concern for her master. Secondly, she's full of faith. What she says as a fact. Again, I imagine myself in her shoes, and I'm giving all kinds of disclaimers and caveats, okay? You might want to think about, there's this guy, I've heard of, he lives in Samaria, and some people have really been helped by him. He might be able to help you if you were to get, maybe, some people have been helped, others maybe not, but maybe you should try it. It's an option. But this girl states it clearly, a statement of unadulterated faith. If my master would go to the prophet in Samaria, he would be healed from his leprosy. The implication there is not that she has faith in the prophet, who we'll meet a little later in this account. And the reality, folks, is that the prophet is a very minor character in this whole story. He makes a very brief appearance. It's faith in God. She shows concern for her master. She's full of faith. And thirdly, she's bold. She has no standing, no power. And I imagine it might have been a little risky for her to say something. And again, as I've said twice already, for a third time, putting myself in her shoes, and I see my master starting to prepare for this journey, and all this money and all this stuff he's taking with him, and how high the expectations have become, and I'm like, oh no, he's going to Samaria. Oh no, he's not going to be healed. What's going to happen? What if it doesn't work out? He's going to come back, he's going to be angry at me, all this expense, all this journey, everything else, it's going to be my fault. What? We don't know exactly what went on in her heart and mind during this time, but once again, the boldness that she had to speak a word of truth and hope, even in her low position. Now, here's the most astonishing thing. They listened to her. They listened to her. She's a young foreign slave girl. She says two phrases, and I want you to follow along with me where all the transitions, because her words arrive at the highest political power in the land. I don't know the context in which she said these words to her mistress. I don't know if she was serving her breakfast in bed or something, and she said, oh, if only my master would go seek the prophet. I don't know the context, but follow the chain of events. She says it to the woman, the mistress says it to her husband, and the next thing you know, the husband's talking about it in the court of the king. And it doesn't stop there. The influence continues across national boundaries to another king. And all of this starts way back here with the slave girl. Brothers and sisters, this is the sovereignty of God. You have to see this. This is not the power of the girl. She's all these things we've been talking about. She is full of faith. She has concern for her master. She is bold. But the fact that her words go from the lowest of the low in the household to the king, it's because God was carrying those words, and he took them there. And imagine yourself, I don't know what you consider the lowest of the low. I don't know, but if you're walking along the street and a mendigo or a homeless person runs up behind you and grabs your shoulder and turns you around and says, you should go to Argentina to see the prophet there and he'll heal you. What do? You walk away quickly, looking over your shoulder, trying to get away. Argentina? That's south of here. Argentina? Really? This is crazy. They listened to her. They listened to this girl, and they're taking her seriously all the way up to the king. The power of God and his sovereignty to make the words of a little girl heard in the ears of the king. There's one last implication about this that we need to draw out, because the fact that the woman, to begin with, her mistress, would listen to her, and that as the word is passed up the ladder, people continue to listen, it also says something about the character of the little girl. Because if she were known in that house as someone who didn't do her work, as someone who was a cheat, as someone who was a liar, as someone who could not be trusted, as someone who did not serve willingly, her words would never have been listened to. But they were. And as the story moves on, we see Naaman then making preparations for his trip. And look at all the stuff he's packing. 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 sets of clothing. In modern currency today, here in Brazil, this amount that he's bringing is a lot of money. Okay? That's what they're communicating. This is a lot of money. And he's packing all this stuff up. He's loading it. I don't know if he's putting it on camels or what he's putting it on. And he's preparing to make a significant journey. Remember, people, this is not, I'm going to go over to Congonhas and buy a ponte aérea ticket to Rio, and I'm going to be there this morning, and I'll be back by this afternoon healed. This is a significant commitment of weeks, probably months, dangerous journey into a foreign territory at which we are at odds, with whom we have fought often in the past, and with whom we will briefly be fighting again, although they didn't know that at the time. And he's making all these preparations to go. And as soon as Naaman shares the words of the slave girl with the king, everything gets bungled up. You notice that? Everything gets confused because in the next thing you know, the king's writing a letter to the king of Israel, telling the king of Israel to heal Naaman, and there's no mention anymore of the prophet, and everything's confused. Folks, there's one truth that has been remained true for over 3,000 years, and that is the same: don't get the government involved. It's only going to mess things up. That's not really a biblical truth, but I do see some humor there. You know, once the government officials try to handle things, it just gets all confused. Naaman, you should have kept it to yourself and just gone and done it, you know. You know you're supposed to look for the prophet. But all joking aside, note Naaman's faith as well. We've got to see this because faith is revealed in action, right? Now, Naaman did not know Yahweh. He did not know the God of Israel. And yet, for some reason, he is moved to action. It could be that he was just at the end of his rope and he was desperate and he was looking for any possible thread of hope. It could be that. But the way the story is related to us, it doesn't make him seem like a desperate man. Remember that the story of the woman in the New Testament that had been bleeding for 12 years and she'd wasted all her money on all the doctors and all the cures and there was nothing that helped her? That woman was desperate. But we don't see that same kind of attitude here in Naaman. He's talking about it, talking to the king. Go, okay, I'll go. He believes that the trip, the hassle, and the expense is worth it. And that's crazy. Unless we take into the account the fact that God, at some level, is working in Naaman. And the author of the account sets up a very interesting contrast for us here because on one side we have the pagans, and on the other side, the Israelite king, who, by the way, is King Joram. King Joram is one of the sons of Ahab. So let's give him some grace. He didn't start off his life really well with a great example. But even so, when the message gets to him, he doesn't even think of Elisha, let alone think of God. What's going on? This guy's trying to pick a quarrel with me. What am I? Can I kill and bring back to life? This guy wants me to heal him of his leprosy. Look what he's trying to do to me. And not one time does he think, oh, ding, 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 God. Or, what an opportunity. What about that prophet, Elisha, that's been running around, causing all kind of havoc for everything, because everything he says comes true, and everything he does turns out right, and it's always against me, and they're always warning us. What about him? It starts with Elisha. Somehow the word has to filter down. It's got to come down through the levels until Elisha hears about it, then he has to take the initiative, and he sends to the king, and he's like, King Joram, send him to me. Go ahead, send him to me. Why are you tearing your robes? Why are you doing this? Send him to me, and then he will know that there's a prophet of the Lord in Israel. Send him to me. Notice this dichotomy. Who's showing faith? It's a slave girl and the pagans. Who's not? The king of Israel, the king of God's people, who theoretically should know the law of the Lord, who theoretically should have all the answer, who theoretically his first thought should have been God, should have been, look at the opportunity that God has to heal this man. But Joram is nowhere in that vicinity. Nowhere. He's freaking out because he knows that he can't do it. And he can't think anything beyond that. It's important for us to see a truth about God's heart for people in this, because the Old Testament is a Jewish book, but it's not primarily about the Jews. It's primarily about God and his self-revelation to people. And God chose to do it through one nation, and he said, in this nation, I'm choosing this nation through whom I am going to reveal myself to the whole world. But there's the key, to the whole world. Unless you think that this is just a New Testament concept, you go back and read the account of the Exodus, and you see as the Israelite people, after all the plagues and everything else has happened, and they're leaving Egypt, the text tells us that there's a great mixed multitude that goes with them. And that's already pointing to the heart of God for the nations. A mixed multitude, people of many different nations, many different tribes and tongues are already joining God's people in leaving Egypt. And we see this again, it's a smaller example, but we see it again here. Who is God's sovereignty working on behalf of? A pagan general, through whom a little slave girl. For what? For God's glory. It's revealing his heart for the nations. He has a chosen people, but he hasn't rejected everybody else. And here he's inviting Naaman to receive his healing. Naaman doesn't know that yet, but that's what's going to happen. And here we see pagans acting more Jewishly than the Jewish king. Little principle here for us to think about. Calling ourselves a Christian doesn't make us a Christian. And saying that we're a Christ follower doesn't make us a Christ follower. It's a matter of our heart and a matter of obedience. And once again, we see the pagans here acting more Jewishly than the Jewish king. So to draw this together, this first act, drawing it to a close, we've got the Elisha sending the message to the king. King Joram, send Naaman to me, and he'll know that there's a prophet in Israel. Okay, that's fine. We've gotten to that point of the story. But how do we draw this together to apply it to where we are now, today? God is sovereign, and in his sovereignty, he places people where he wants them. It may be through tragedy, as it was in the case of the slave girl. And her attitude could have been resentment and bitterness and anger. And you know, from a human perspective, she would have been very justified to have that kind of response. You are where God has placed you. The choice that we're given is whether we will join him in his work where we are. We usually focus on the place. That's our tendency. Lord, I wish I was someplace else, or I'd rather be in the place that that person is, or I'd rather be doing what they're doing, but that's not the issue. The issue is God has put us where he's put us. Will we join him in his work where he has placed us? Because God extends a continual invitation to his people. Join me. Be part of my heart for the nations. Be part of my work on earth. And folks, it's not because God needs us. Did you hear the psalm this morning? What does God say? If I were hungry, I'm not going to tell you. What could you do about it? I own everything there is. I don't need you. For those of you who are parents out there, let's see. Yeah, okay, Micah, my younger son's not in here. Okay, so when I'm going to wash the car, for instance, which I don't do nearly as much as I should, but from time to time when I wash the car, I say, hey, Micah, do you want to help me wash the car? And he always says yes. I'm going to be honest with you for a second. I don't need Micah's help washing the car. I could wash the car much more efficiently without Micah's help, because his help usually involves trying to spray me with water. That's usually his, idea of washing the car. But why do I invite him to help me? Because he's my son, because I love him, and because it's an opportunity for us to do something together, and I can at least halfway accomplish something together with him. And so Jesus, he invites us to join him. God the Father says, come, listen, I'm giving you the privilege. Because you're my children, I'm giving you an offer. Join me in my work, not because I need you, but because you need me. And this is an opportunity that you have to participate in my joy. And I want you to have that opportunity. I've put you where I've put you because that's where I want you to join me. So wherever God has placed you, be ready to live the truth and speak the truth in love. And as I said earlier, the slave girl must have earned a hearing for her words by her character. And many of us, though, maybe some of us are ashamed to speak because we know that our character and the way people have seen us live isn't going to back up what we have to say. But the other side of it is sometimes we like to also say, I'm just going to let my actions speak for themselves and I'm not going to have to say anything, But they both go together. The way we live and then the way we speak. So the slave girl, under God's sovereignty, who placed her where she was through tragedy, speaks one brief sentence of hope and truth. And look at everything that followed. You don't know where God's going to take your words. You don't know. You don't know what He's going to do with them, feeble as they may be. Now, I want to talk to you, kids and teenagers, just for a second. Where has God put you? Christian Rast, I see you. Where has God put you? You don't have to answer that. Where has God put you? Maybe you think, God didn't put me in school, my parents put me in school. And God didn't put me in church this morning, my parents put me in church this morning. And you may think it's a tragedy, but God put you there. SJ, where did God put you? He wants to use you, and He's inviting you wherever you are. Guys, some of you are going to be at a tournament this week where God is putting you. What are you going to do when He invites you to join Him in His work there? What about with your friends on the street? What about your friends at school? Adults, those of you who work. What about your place of work? What about your context within your extended family? All those places, God has put you there. And you don't know how He might use the words of truth that you are willing to speak, that He elicits from you. And how He will extrapolate them perhaps beyond your greatest imagination for His glory. I know it's intimidating, right? We're afraid of being mocked, or maybe even worse, of being ignored. But I want to stress again, it's not that the slave girl's words were so eloquent or so convincing or so filled with the art of rhetoric that gained her the hearing. It was because God took it and did it. And so He extends to you an opportunity and says, will you join me in my work here? This morning, as we celebrate communion, there may be some of you who have a desire and you're saying, Lord, I want to join you in your work. I know that there have been times in the past where I haven't taken advantage of opportunities that you've given me to do that. I want to do that, but I'm afraid. I'm worried. I'm insecure. I don't have any position. I don't have any authority. Lord, give me what I need to respond to you. That's the gift of the gospel, is that God elicits a response from us, and then he gives us the ability to respond. And communion is a beautiful image of that, because we come to him and we receive from him. And our bodies literally, physically take bread and wine, juice. And as our bodies are fed physically, it symbolizes the spiritual feeding of our souls by the Holy Spirit through the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so the act of coming to the table and saying, Lord, I receive. What do you have to give to me? I receive it, is beautifully imaged in the Lord's Supper. And we have that opportunity this morning. So as we prepare the table, I would invite you once again to have some time in silence before the Lord, to come to him, to say, God, I receive from you. What do you have for me? I'm ready to receive whatever you want to give me. Prepare your hearts for the celebration.